Hey guys, tonight we stumble into a fog-wrapped forest at the edge of myth and mischief. The trees are tall, skeletal silhouettes against a fading violet sky, and the air smells like moss-wet bark and unanswered questions. There's no road here, only a soft trail worn down by the passing of strange things that don't make a lot of noise but leave behind a feeling like something is watching you, maybe from behind that crooked oak or under that damp rock. But don't worry, probably just a squirrel, a really judgmental squirrel. The last light of the sun clings to the top branches as you walk boots silent on the pine needle floor. Mist pools in the dips of the earth like soup that's been forgotten on the stove. You tug your cloak tighter. There's a chill here that doesn't seem to come from the wind, but from the story itself, as if the trees are keeping a secret. And it has something to do with a boar, a talking one. You probably won't survive this, not because of any monster or vengeful god or vengeful tax collector disguised as a monster, but because you're about to walk into a Greek myth with paperwork, political intrigue, and the kind of cursed woodland beast that insists on being addressed with formal titles. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The path leads you deeper into the trees. Your feet crunch softly, rhythmically, like a lullaby composed by branches. You pass a stone, ancient and half swallowed by earth, with letters etched in a language even the gods don't bother translating anymore. A soft wind rustles the canopy. It doesn't speak, yet. Then you hear it, the unmistakable, deliberate snort of a boar. Not wild, not panicked, but theatrical. You freeze. There's a flicker of movement up ahead. Between two trees where the mist gathers like gossip stands a creature. A boar, yes, tusked and covered in bristled hair the color of rust and regrets. But its eyes are too knowing. They gleam like they've read things. Signed documents, written reviews. The boar blinks slowly, deliberately, as if giving you a moment to brace yourself. Then it speaks. About time, it says in a gravelly, unimpressed tone. I've been waiting since sunrise. Honestly, the pacing in these stories is glacial. You say nothing. What do you say to a talking boar? He sighs, sits, and gestures with one cloven hoof. Don't stand there gaping. Come on. I have tea brewing and a scandal to explain. You do the only logical thing, follow the boar. As you walk beside him, yes, beside him, because apparently he insists on conversational pacing, he starts to tell you about the forest, about how the trees were planted by a forgetful minor god with a habit of misplacing islands, about how every rock used to be something else, and some still remember what they were. One used to be a ship, one a royal advisor. Nothing stays the same in these stories, the boar says, almost wistful. Except maybe the weather. Always fog, always mystery, always people wandering in at dusk like moths to a metaphor. You ask why he talks. He stops walking, turns to you, because someone made a wish, he says, and forgot to be specific. Then he chuckles, deep and wheezy like a rusty hinge, trying to remember how to sing. You arrive at a clearing where the grass grows in a perfect circle. In the center, a stone table. Upon it, a chipped ceramic teapot and two uneven mugs. The boar pours you a cup. It's not poisoned, he adds helpfully. That's illegal in my jurisdiction. You sip. It tastes like chamomile and the vague memory of spring. And then he starts talking, properly. Not just about the forest or the trees or the mushroom with ambition, but about a king, a foolish one, with questions. He wanted to know why the boar says, why the forest whispers, why his hairline kept receding, why boars shouldn't be allowed near diplomatic meetings. Foolish man. You raise an eyebrow. He found me, the boar continues. didn't even bring fruit, just barged into my glade, demanded answers, and threatened to write me a strongly worded decree. You ask what happened next. The boar grins. It's unsettling. He got answers, but not the kind he liked. The fireflies begin to glow in the bushes. The mist thickens again, curling like the edges of a closing book. The boar stands. Enough for tonight, he says. Come back tomorrow. Bring better tea. You blink, and he's gone. The teacup is still warm in your hands. The next morning, if it is a morning, because let's face it, mythological forests don't operate on a traditional schedule. You find yourself retracing your steps. The grass still holds the memory of your footprints. The mist is lighter now, but still drifts between tree trunks, like a nosy neighbor checking up on gossip. The boar said to return. So you do, because when a boar with political opinions and a sense of timekeeping tells you something, you listen. As you pass the ancient stone with its half-erased markings, you imagine it blinking sleepily. Everything here feels alive but slightly distracted, like the world's been left on idle by the gods while they step out for lunch. And then you hear it again, the snort, followed by an unmistakable grunt that sounds an awful lot like "took you long enough." The boar is reclining beneath a crooked olive tree, one tusk half buried in the loam eyes, half lidded in a way that suggests he's been preparing an overly dramatic retelling all night. I suppose he says we should begin with the king. You sit across from him on a lichen-covered stone, which squelches slightly but decides not to complain. He wasn't always foolish. The boar begins staring off into the trees, like a bard setting the stage. He was born into mild competence. Reasonably smart, decent cheekbones, passable handwriting. You nod politely, but he continues, as is often the case. The problem began with ambition and a hat. You ask him to clarify. A crown, he mutters, waving a hoof. But let's not pretend it wasn't just a fancy hat with consequences. The king, whose name was Melanthios, because of course it was, had ruled a small kingdom wedged between two larger, noisier ones. His people were known for herding goats, producing subpar wine, and losing nearly every regional poetry competition to their more dramatic neighbors. Melanthios had what historians would call a complex, not about his kingdom, not about his nose, which was formidable, but about knowledge. He wanted to know things, all things. He wanted to be the wisest king to ever rule, the kind who couldn't walk down the street without villagers bowing and whispering, "There goes the man who once debated a god and won on a technicality." Unfortunately, Melanthios lacked both patience and context, two crucial components of wisdom. He started small. The boar explains, scratching behind his ear with one hind leg. First, he questioned the tax code. Fine, reasonable. Then he grilled the palace cook on the origin of onions. A bit much. Then he tried to cross-examine the stars. You blink. Yes, the boar says. He built a ladder, a tall one. When that failed, the king turned his attention to the oddities of the landstones that hummed trees, that grew sideways, goats that refused to face north, and eventually the forest. He came here, the boar says, voice dropping slightly, with scrolls, sandals, and far too many assistants. This forest, old and not entirely tethered to reality, had long been avoided by the locals, not because it was dangerous per se, but because it had rules. Rules that didn't care much for mortals, especially the ones who asked too many questions. He broke all of them. The boar snorts, stepped on the moss with his left foot, recited a poem without a permit, and worst of all, he asked me why. You wince. Apparently that's considered extremely rude in boar etiquette. I was minding my business, the boar says, gesturing to the clearing, reading a copy of Hesiod's lesser-known works and wondering what mushrooms taste like to humans. And then Melanthios had appeared, parchment in hand, eyes wide, with that dangerous glint of curiosity. He demanded answers, the boar growls. He said it was his royal right to understand everything within his realm. I told him I didn't take orders from glorified vegetable holders. You cough into your hand to hide a laugh. The boar narrows his eyes. He didn't take it well. He accused me of hiding ancient truths, said I was hoarding secrets, tried to bribe me with a pear. You pause. Did you take it? Of course, he says, but I still cursed him. Ah, there it is. Lightly, the boar adds, just enough to make him ask worse questions. Apparently the curse didn't change the king's appearance or steal his voice or give him donkey ears, though that would come later for someone else. No, it twisted his thoughts ever so slightly. His questions became muddled, recursive, self-defeating. He'd stare at a flower and ask why petals were shy, the boar says, or interrogate the wind on what it was running from. His advisors were baffled. His people were concerned. His court poet wrote a sonnet about it, which later won a regional prize. Eventually, Melanthios returned to the forest, determined to undo the damage. He brought a bard, an astrologer, and 3 sheep as offerings. None of them worked, the boar says smugly, although the bard did compose a rather catchy lament. You ask what happened to the sheep. They joined a commune. Last I heard, one became a tax collector. You blink again. The boar is inscrutable. At this point, the forest is full of birdsong. Somewhere behind you, a branch cracks, but not from wind, from memory. This place listens, and so the boar continues rising to his full, unimpressive height. The king began to spiral. He still ruled, but now he questioned everything meals, moonlight, and once the concept of Thursdays. You ask if he ever found peace. The boar shrugs. Depends. Do you think having your destiny tangled up in a talking boar counts as peace fair point? He steps back into the mist, his tail flicking once. You'll need to speak to the oracle next, he says over his shoulder. But be warned, she has opinions and a hangover, and then he vanishes again like a nap you can't quite fall back into. You wake, sort of. You were never quite asleep, not really. This forest seems to keep you in a half-dream state, the way an overly warm blanket lulls you into that floating space between thought and nap. You sit up slowly, rub the side of your face, and glance around. The clearing is empty, as expected. No talking boar, no tea, no birds brave enough to interrupt the myth's pacing. You stretch, rise, and head east, because the boar mentioned an oracle. And everyone knows oracles only live east of wherever you are. The forest thickens a little, leaves darker, air damper. Moss blankets the trees in silent judgment. You pass a pile of mushrooms arranged in a spiral. Not a natural spiral. A message, probably, something ominous. You ignore it like a responsible narrator. Then you spotted a small stone arch, just barely wide enough to pass through, covered in ivy and poor life choices. The air beneath it smells like sandalwood herbs and something vaguely burnt. A voice croaks out, "If you're the cheese merchant I asked for you yesterday." You step through the arch. There, in a circle of flickering blue fire, sits the oracle. Or rather lies the oracle, face down in a blanket under what appears to be a pile of pillows, parchment, and 2 empty jugs of something probably not water. She groans. "I told them not to send you," she mutters, not looking up. "You're too earnest, and you walk like a person who alphabetizes their goat names." You gently clear your throat. She rolls over. Her hair is a tangled vine of curls and beads. Her robe is indigo with constellations stitched in thread that shimmers unnervingly. Her eyes are rimmed with charcoal, either ceremonial or the result of sleeping face down in a spice rack. "You want answers?" she asks, already annoyed. "Of course you do. That's the thing these days. Everyone wants to know what's coming, and no one wants to do the dishes. You say you've been sent by a talking boar." She sighs and sits up. "Of course you have. That hairy bureaucrat has been meddling again." She snaps her fingers, and a pot of water boils itself in the corner. You're handed a cup of something thick green and probably medicinal. You sip. It tastes like regret. Right, she says, finally meeting your gaze. You want to know about the king. You nod. Well, she says he wasn't the worst one I've met, but he may have been the loudest. According to the oracle, King Melanthios visited her 3 times. Each time he brought a different question and left with a different headache. The first time, she says, he asked how to become the wisest man in Greece. I told him to listen. You wait. That's it, she says. Just listen. Not to me, not to the gods. Just listen to people, to trees, to goats if necessary. You ask what he said. He said, and I quote, "Do you have that in writing?" The second time, he came in a chariot made of silver and sandalwood, flanked by flutists, real flutists, playing the same note over and over. He wanted to know what the gods thought of him, she says. I told him they hadn't mentioned him. You try not to laugh, you fail. She continues sipping her own drink, which smells like herbs and sarcasm. And the third time you ask, she leans in. He asked about the forest, about the talking creature within. He didn't say Boar, but I knew. I always know. You ask what she told him. I told him she says that some creatures speak because they are cursed, and others because they're bored. And sometimes the difference isn't important. You sit with that. She eyes you carefully. He didn't understand. Not really. He thought he could catalog it, turn it into an exhibit. The forest doesn't respond well to footnotes. You glance around her tent or shrine or pillow fort. It's hard to tell what category it belongs to. Everything smells of old knowledge. Wax, ferns, candied lemons, bad decisions in ancient languages. You want to help him, she asks suddenly. You hesitate, then nod, then tell him to stop asking and start listening. Really listening to the silence, to the things that grow when he's not talking. She stands, wobbles, and waves a hand. A thin scroll appears floating lazily toward you. Give him this, she says. It's mostly blank. He'll hate it. You take it. The scroll is warm to the touch, as if it remembers being helpful once. She begins to settle back into her pillows, disappearing like a loaf of bread in a hungry house. Oh, she mumbles already halfway into sleep. Tell the boar he still owes me 5 olives and an apology. You exit through the stone arch. The forest seems a little quieter, a little less curled in suspicion. As you walk, scroll tucked beneath your arm, you wonder, what does a king do with silence? And can a boar ever apologize? Historians still argue whether oracles were reliable sources of truth, nonsense, or something more dangerous, poetic ambiguity. But what is certain is this: every myth has a moment when someone asks a question they shouldn't. You think the king may have passed that moment several questions ago. Up ahead, the trees part slightly, and in the misty clearing, the boar waits again. This time he's reclining with a flower behind one ear and a self-satisfied smirk. Did she mention the olives, he asks before you can speak. You nod. He groans. She never forgets anything. The boar does not rise when you approach. He simply lies there like a dignitary on sabbatical legs tucked beneath him, flower still perched absurdly behind one ear. It's purple and slightly wilted, as though even the flora knows better than to argue with a mythological beast in leisure mode. So he grunts, stretching like a cat who pays taxes. What did she give you? A riddle, a rash, or a hangover? You hold up the scroll. He groans again. Ugh, her blank wisdom special. Classic. You sit cross-legged on the moss across from him. The scroll flutters faintly in your hand, heavy with implication and practically vibrating with unreadable smugness. She means well, he mutters, but she thinks vagueness is a virtue. You mentioned she said something about listening. The boar snorts, which in his case is like someone blowing raspberries with philosophical weight. Of course she did. She's been saying that since the Bronze Age. To kings, to queens, to wandering heroes who thought their golden sandals made them interesting. He eyes the scroll, then you. Well, he says, I suppose it's time to revisit our dear monarch and his growing spiral. You lean back against a stone as the boar launches into another tale, one that apparently requires him to pace because he stands up, stretches, and begins trudging in circles. After the oracle visit, the king returned to his court, he says, but not with clarity. No, he returned with urgency, a dangerous thing in a man already confused. King Melanthios, upon receiving the oracle's enigmatic message, had gathered his council and announced a new royal initiative called the Listening Decree. It was not as noble as it sounded. He made everyone be silent for an hour every day, the boar says, circling you. Not reflect, not meditate, just silence. Mandated. He even fined people for sneezing too loudly. You ask how that worked. Terribly, the boar replies. Oh, the bakers boycotted the bards, revolted, and the goats? Well, the goats didn't care, but still. And then there was the royal breakfast incident. One morning, the boar says, clearly enjoying himself. Now, he walked into the great hall and declared that no one would eat until someone listened deeply to the meaning of butter. You raise an eyebrow. Yes, the boar nods solemnly. 2 ministers fainted. 1 noblewoman renounced dairy forever. It was chaos, but the king believed himself enlightened. He would sit for hours on the palace balcony, staring at clouds, nodding slowly like a philosopher with a crick in his neck. He started talking in riddles, half-finished metaphors, and once tried to explain tax reform using only parables about grapes. He'd have ministers sit beside him in silence while he listened to bees, the boar says, pausing beside a toadstool. And then he'd ask, but what did the absence of buzzing tell you? You sigh. You've met this type before, usually in seminars. But not all his court had abandoned reason. One minister, clever, quiet, tired, had begun keeping a secret journal documenting the king's questions. She wrote down every query, every odd demand, every philosophical tangent involving soup. She called it the Codex of Curiosities, the boar says, and she hoped one day it might help decode what was left of his logic. Historians still argue whether such a document ever existed, or whether it was simply invented by later scribes desperate to impose order on a king who once outlawed Wednesdays. Meanwhile, the king became obsessed with finding the origin of sound. Not a sound, all sound. He believed the answer would restore his wisdom and allow him to command the air itself. So naturally, the boar says he decided to build a large hollow stone ear. You stare. He what? Exactly what I said, the boar replies. 50 feet tall, made from marble, positioned to listen to the cosmos. So it took 12 stonemasons, 4 goats, and 1 very confused architect. The structure, known only as the Great Ear, became the subject of court poetry, satire, and eventually a local drinking game. But the king took it seriously, the boar says, settling back down now. He'd climb into the inner chamber and just sit for hours, listening, waiting, hoping for what no one knows. The boar murmurs, perhaps an echo from the gods, perhaps an answer from the void, perhaps the sound of his own thoughts resolving into sense. You both sit in silence for a while. A soft breeze stirs the moss. The trees creak gently like old furniture remembering music. Somewhere distant, a bird calls once, then thinks better of it. The boar speaks again, more softly now. There's a difference, he says, between seeking truth and fearing ignorance. The king never learned that. You glance down at the scroll, still blank, still humming, with invisible weight. The boar snorts again. She gave him that same scroll, he says. He stared at it for 3 days, expecting the letters to appear. And did they? No, the boar says. Because the truth doesn't reveal itself like magic ink. Sometimes it sits quietly, waiting to be heard. You tuck the scroll away. The boar rises again, shakes dust from his fur, and turns toward the north path. "Come on," he says. "It's time you met the village. They've got opinions. And turnips, mostly opinions. You follow, and behind you, somewhere in the moss and roots, the great ear quietly gathers wind. The path to the village isn't paved, because of course it isn't. Greek myths don't do paving. Instead, it's a meandering foot trail, laced with goat droppings, philosophical regrets, and the faintest whiff of turnip soup. The boar leads confidently, trotting with the purposeful bounce of someone who believes themselves welcome everywhere, despite evidence to the contrary. You trudge behind him, brushing aside low branches that appear to grow directly into your face on purpose. The trees thin reluctantly until the first signs of human settlement peek through a crooked fence made of mismatched wood, a laundry line with exactly one sock and a very small tunic, and a sign that reads, "Please do not pet the goats, they bite critics." "This is Themistocleion," the boar announces grandly. "Population ambivalent. Specialty pretending things aren't their problem." The village is nestled in a shallow valley, half wrapped in vines, half wrapped in collective denial. You pass houses with shuttered windows and doors open just wide enough for one suspicious eye. Smoke curls from chimneys. Children watch from rooftops. Somewhere a lute hits a wrong note and doesn't apologize. You ask the boar what exactly happened here. He pauses in the middle of the path, to tail swishing. "Well," he says, "the king came. And then the questions came. And then people just stopped caring." Apparently King Melanthios had once visited the village to conduct a survey which involved asking every resident at least one question they couldn't possibly answer, like what you asked. The boar counts them off on his hoof. Why does thunder wait before it speaks? What is the moral alignment of cheese? And my personal favorite, if two goats pass in the night, but only one is thinking of soup, is it still a metaphor? You can almost hear the villagers groan in historical unison. They tried at first. Really. They hosted philosophical salons in the local tavern, added extra benches for group contemplation, and even started a village-wide question of the day chalkboard. But it wore thin, the boar explains, around the time he insisted their wheat fields were a metaphor for unfinished conversations. The turning point was a town hall meeting where the king asked the local blacksmith if anvils could dream. He said yes, but only on Tuesdays, the boar mutters. You arrive at the center of the village, a cobbled square, two cracked fountains, both dry, and a statue of a woman holding a scroll and a frying pan. Her plaque reads, "Cassandra, patron saint of knowing better." Villagers slowly emerge from behind barrels' doors and inconvenient haystacks. A woman in a saffron tunic folds her arms. A man with a suspiciously intelligent chicken under his arm squints at the boar. Someone finally speaks. "Is it back?" she asks. The boar nods solemnly, the curiosity. "Yes, but I brought backup." All eyes turn to you. Someone mutters, "This one doesn't look very bright." Another replies, "That's a good sign." You clear your throat and hold up the blank scroll. Gasps. One person faints. The chicken lays an egg in protest. The saffron tunic woman steps forward. "You've been to the oracle," you nod, "and the boar hasn't led you into a pit of snakes yet." You shake your head. She sighs. "Fine, come with me. We have tea and unresolved trauma." She leads you into a small cottage walls, lined with drying herbs and shelves full of books with titles like Curses, A User's Guide, and When Kings Ask Too Much, a memoir. Her name is Myra. She used to be a midwife. Now she's the village's unofficial historian therapist. And person you hide behind when things get weird. She pours you something that smells faintly of rosemary and firm disappointment. My grandfather, she says, was the last person to speak directly to the king. He tried to explain that the village had no deeper symbolism, that our sheep were just sheep, not allegories. The king cried. She sips. Then he declared our wind patterns aggressively mysterious and vanished into the woods for a month. You ask if the villagers ever tried to confront him. Oh yes, she says. We sent him a politely worded letter. 3 goats delivered it. Only 2 came back. The boar, reclining in a corner on a woven rug, clears his throat. They came back enlightened, he says defensively. They came back weird, Myra replies. You ask what the village wants now, what they expect of you. She shrugs. We want quiet, stability, fewer parables in our turnip markets. You promised to try. Try, she says, standing means you'll probably fail in mythological terms. But still, it's polite. The boar rises. There's one more place you need to see, he says, where the king asked the first question. Myra flinches. Don't take him there in the rain. The boar nods. I won't. Not unless it's dramatic. You exit the cottage into a low hum of suspicious acceptance. The villagers nod at you, not quite kindly, but not unkindly either. The boar leads you to the edge of the square where an old well sits unused. A sign nearby reads, "Water here is metaphorical. Drink at own risk." You laugh. The boar doesn't. That's where it started, he says softly. The king leaned over that well and asked it why it was always empty, and something answered. You wait. He didn't hear words, just silence, but he thought it was an insult, that the forest had mocked him. You sit on the well's edge. The boar lowers his head, and from then on, he couldn't stop asking. You place the scroll beside you. It doesn't glow, doesn't whisper, just waits, like the village, like the myth, like you. The well doesn't say anything. It just sits there, stone-ringed dry throat, the faint smell of time baked into its mossy rim. You look down. Darkness looks back. Not the scary kind. The I've been empty a long time and honestly I'm fine with it kind. The boar gives a low snort, not a dramatic one, more like the exhale of someone preparing for a tedious but necessary explanation. You know, he says back in the day, wells were considered sacred. Hidden spirits talking reflections, the occasional cursed bucket. This one, it just gave him silence. He walks around it slowly, a kind of orbit. The king thought it was profound, thought the silence meant something deeper, something coded, like the well was withholding the answers on purpose. You rest your hand on the stone. It's cool even in the rising sun. The moss gives a little under your fingers as if it's tired of being stepped on by history. Historians still argue the boar mutters whether that silence was divine tragic or just basic physics. I say maybe all 3. You stand and dust off your cloak. There's still more to see and apparently more to be mildly unsettled by. The boar leads you away from the village. The path is newer this time, less traveled, softer. Ferns brush your knees. The forest closes in again, not in a menacing way, more like a blanket that doesn't understand personal space. You glance at the boar. Where are we going? He doesn't look back. To the ruins. You should see what happens when questions pile up and no one cleans them up. Ah, that sounds promising. You arrive at a clearing where once clearly something large and important stood. A temple, maybe. A monument to ambition. Now it's half-fallen columns, ivy-covered stone blocks, and one very startled lizard that scurries away before it can be metaphorized. The boar gestures broadly. Behold, the temple of trying too hard. You blink. That's not its real name, he admits, but it fits. According to him, this place was built by the king after his first few epiphanies. He'd had the well moment, misunderstood the oracle, and decided he needed a physical space to receive cosmic insight. So naturally, the boar says he commissioned a building made entirely of things that couldn't decide what they were. You walk among the ruins. One wall is made of alternating marble and sandstone. A column spirals, then abruptly stops. An inscription on a half-toppled block reads, "Let the answers rise from beneath the silence of unspoken thunder," which is either very deep or just a word salad with delusions of grandeur. There used to be lectures here, the Boar says. He invited sages, dreamers, those guys who always wear robes in the marketplace, even when it's too hot. You ask if it helped. It did, he says, for about 5 days. Then he tried to build a second floor upside down because he thought gravity was hiding something. You step carefully over a broken slab. There's a carved relief partially buried in moss. A goat with wings, a crown with legs, a man shouting at a tree. I think he started to believe the metaphors were becoming real, the Boar adds, which is fair. In myths, they often do, but usually not like this. There's a strange kind of peace here. The wind flows in soft swirls, the grass hums with bees, and the ruins exhale that breathless awe you only find in places where people once tried too hard to matter. You find a small niche carved into the remaining wall. Inside it rests a stone bowl, empty. Above it, a weather-worn plaque. Ask nothing, answer less, listen most. You raise your eyebrows. The Boar nods. That was added later, by the villagers, I think, after he stopped coming. You sit on a fallen block, the scroll still tucked under your arm, its blank surface a perfect echo of that phrase. Ask nothing, answer less, listen most. You wonder if the king ever read it, or if he simply walked by too busy asking the moss if it preferred metaphors in iambic or trochaic meter. The Boar sits beside you, surprisingly quietly. Want to hear what happened next? He asks. You nod. He brought in a philosopher. Of course he did. A real one. Robes, sandals, beard that probably held secrets of its own. The philosopher's name allegedly was Glaucus, which you can already tell was going to be a problem. He believed in disrupting narratives, the Boar says, making air quotes with his hooves, somehow. His first official act was to declare that all temples were too vertical. You don't even ask. Glaucus became the king's closest advisor for a full moon cycle, which in mythological terms is roughly 6 months of intellectual disaster. He told the king that truth was like soup, better when stirred, dangerous when boiled, and useless without salt. You wince. He then tried to build a thinking platform in the shape of a question mark. It collapsed. Eventually, Glaucus wandered into the forest to interview a squirrel and never returned. The king was devastated, the Boar says. He said the man was the only one who truly understood the elusive dialectic of moss. You stare into the empty bowl again. Eventually, the Boar stands. Let's go, he says. We're not far from the place where he tried to have a conversation with a rainbow. You pause. You're joking. He doesn't answer. You sigh and follow. Behind you, the wind rattles through the broken stones. The temple says nothing, and perhaps that is the answer. You're walking again following the Boar, who is now humming badly and off-key, a tune he claims was once performed at Dionysus's niece's wedding. The forest around you begins to feel different. Less misty mystery, more scrub and sun. The trees pull back, giving way to open stretches of uneven stone tall grass and stubborn plants that have clearly survived on spite. This, the Boar says, is where it gets strange. You raise an eyebrow. Stranger than talking goats and scrolls that emotionally manipulate you with their blankness. Oh yes, he continues, because now we arrive at the part of the story where the Boar starts talking. You stare, I mean me, he says, pausing to sit beneath a wind-warped cypress. The Boar in the story is me. This is where I enter the myth. You blink. You weren't always in it. He shakes his head. I was just a boar, a regular one. Mud tusks, the occasional noble chase, nothing fancy. You sit beside him, the scroll resting in your lap like a quiet observer. So what happened? you ask. He sighs long and theatrical. I was cursed. Of course he was. Not by a god, he adds. Not directly, but by a king. Specifically, a king who asked the wrong question at the wrong time in the wrong forest. You glance around. This forest? He nods. It had started, he explains, on a morning not unlike this one. Dew still on the grassbirds singing as if they hadn't read the script. The king Melanthios, ever curious, ever earnest, had ventured out with a single question, bouncing around his royal skull. What makes something wise, not someone? Something. He sat on a stump, the boar says, and said it out loud, like a summoning spell. And because this forest is old and bored and occasionally mischievous, it decided to answer. The boar had been nearby, snuffling, rooting around for truffles or possibly avoiding taxes, it's unclear. And then he says, I felt something crawl down my spine, like cold ink. And suddenly he spoke, not just noises, words, whole sentences, opinions about acorns, critiques of root structure, and yes, insights into wisdom, unsolicited and occasionally accurate. Of course, he adds dryly, the king thought I was a spirit. You ask if he told the truth. Absolutely not, the boar grins. I said I was the prime boar of clarity, envoy of the elder swine guardian of the forest epistemic. You try not to laugh. You fail. He asked me questions for hours. I answered all of them. Some truth, some nonsense. It didn't matter. He believed me. And then came the mistake. He asked me, the boar says, voice dropping slightly, if I thought he was wise. You hold your breath. And I said, he continues, only a fool asks the woods for confirmation. You wince. So he cursed me, the boar shrugs, or prayed for my punishment. Or maybe just said something so emotionally dense that the forest made it real. From that moment forward, the boar could speak, could think in ways boars weren't meant to, could remember, could worry, could form opinions about architectural symmetry. But he says I was also stuck, tethered to this myth, bound to it like a punctuation mark in a sentence that keeps going. You sit quietly. Historians, he says, still debate whether I was punished for honesty or just for being available. But either way, I became the talking boar, he snorts again. It's not as glamorous as it sounds. You ask if he ever tried to undo it. Oh, sure, he says. I tried rhyming prophecies, speaking in riddles, refusing to speak entirely. I once faked amnesia for a full season. Didn't help. The sun peeks through the clouds, now golden and warm, as if the sky is applauding his monologue. You glance at the scroll. Want to hear the real twist, the boar says. You nod. I don't mind it anymore. He stands, stretches his spine with an audible pop, and starts walking again. You follow slower now, the trees thinning further. I get to watch people struggle with things I already worked through, he says. I get to snark at royalty and debate philosophers and occasionally receive fruit. You mention he still seems annoyed. Of course I'm annoyed, he says. But annoyed is just my brand now. The land flattens and suddenly you're in a wide field of pale grass and wind. In the center, a single tall stone with a spiral carved into it. This, the boar says, is where he tried to make sense of me. The king had built the spiral stone, hoping it would resonate with the boar's wisdom. He sat beside it for days, recording everything the boar said. At one point, he tried to feed him olives, soaked in wine. He called it communion, the boar mutters. I called it Tuesday. Eventually, the king wrote a book, one long scroll looping like the spiral dialogues with the beast. He thought it was a philosophical triumph, the boar says. In reality, it was mostly complaints about goat behavior and speculative theories about whether rivers could have opinions. You ask what happened to the scroll. The boar shrugs, vanished, or maybe turned into a flock of pigeons. Hard to say. This forest does strange things with unfinished ideas. You both stand at the spiral stone now. Wind rustles the grass like whispered applause. The stone hums faintly, or maybe it's just your thoughts echoing. The boar places one hoof on the stone. This is where I realized something. You wait. Sometimes myths aren't about truth. They're about telling the same story until someone listens. You nod. He turns away. Come on, he says. It's time you met the bard. He's insufferable, but he rhymes well. You sigh and follow. The spiral hums quietly behind you. The wind carries it forward, and the story impossibly continues. You hear the bard before you see him. A distant strum, mournful and overconfident, floats through the tall grass. It's the kind of sound that makes flowers wilt and birds reconsider careers in music. The boar stops in his tracks, sighs so deeply, it rattles a pine cone loose from a nearby tree and mutters, "Brace yourself." He rhymes everything, even when he's not supposed to. You nod solemnly. Some battles are best faced with quiet dignity. As you crest the next hill, the source of the music appears a young man draped in more fabric than is socially reasonable, lounging atop a flat rock. His cloak is teal and gold, his sandals are impractically laced to mid-calf, and his lute is slightly out of tune, deliberately perhaps, to match his personality. He sees you and immediately stands flinging one arm toward the sky like a dramatic sundial. Hark, he calls, voice rich with theatrical ambition. Is that my tusked muse I see before me, striding across the wind's own path with a stranger at his side and fate at their feet? The boar whispers to you, he once tried to seduce a cloud. It didn't go well. The bard leaps off the rock with more flair than grace, landing in a pose designed for applause that never arrives. He straightens bows deeply and says, I am Thales, minstrel of misadventure, chronicler of chaos, and romantic casualty of 8 failed epics. You shake his hand. He kisses it. Twice. You wipe it discreetly on your cloak. The boar clears his throat. Thales has been documenting the king's saga. Dramatically, I've elevated it, Thales corrects. With lyric, with longing, with lute. You ask how he became involved. Well, Thales says, sweeping his cloak like he's parting curtains, I heard whispers of a king haunted by riddles and a boar who speaks truths sharper than a widow's needle. I came seeking poetry and perhaps romance. You raise an eyebrow. The boar wasn't interested, Thales says quickly. But the king, oh the king, a soul ripe with longing and very poor at metaphor. He needed guidance, he needed song, he needed me. The boar mutters, he needed peace and maybe a cheese sandwich. Thales continues oblivious. I offered him narrative clarity, structure, a through line. His thoughts were scattered, his speeches unsingeable. So I reorganized them, added a tragic love triangle, recast the boar as a misunderstood prophet. It's been wildly popular among pigeons. You ask what the king thought of this creative reinterpretation. He cried, Thales says proudly, said it was the first time he'd truly understood his own confusion. You're beginning to see the problem. Historians still debate, the boar adds, whether Thales helped or made it significantly worse. Oh, I made it worse, Thales admits cheerfully, but with flair. He strums the lute again and begins to sing. Oh, king of questions, noble fool, whose mind unspools like threadless spool, he sought the truth, but found instead a talking boar, and goats well fed. You clap mostly because it seems expected. Thales beams. It's part of my new cycle, the Ballads of Baffled Royalty, currently 27 stanzas and counting. You ask if any of it is useful. Emotionally, Thales says, which is arguably the most important kind. You glance at the boar. He nods. We brought you here because Thales knows what the king did next. He was there. Thales preens slightly. Indeed, I accompanied him to the oracle's cousin. You blink. She has a cousin. Everyone does, the boar mutters. His name was Eutherios, Thales says. He ran a tea cart and dabbled in visions. According to Thales, after the king's failed poetic awakening, He sought out this lesser oracle, hoping for a simpler prophecy, one he could understand without metaphors involving soup. He wanted a straight answer, Thales says. Eutherios gave him one. Your answers lie within the beast. You glance at the boar. He nods grimly. That's when things got complicated. The king returned to the forest and began following the boar, not speaking, not questioning, just shadowing him, watching him eat sleep roll in mud, writing everything down, every sneeze, every grunt. It was unsettling, the boar says. I couldn't chew a mushroom without it being analyzed. You ask what the king was hoping to learn. Everything Thales says. He believed the boar was the answer, not symbolic, literal, that every motion held divine logic. The boar snorts. I once tripped over a root, and he declared it an omen. Thales nods. He called it the stumble of realization. I added a verse. Want to hear it? You shake your head. The bard continues anyway. A hoof that slipped on hidden truth, uncovered fear, uncovered youth. And there, upon that clumsy path, he found the echo of the past. You sigh. He built a shrine, the boar says. To my left ear, you blink. He said it was the one most attuned to cosmic frequencies. He wasn't wrong, Thales adds. You've got good ear shape for resonance. The boar growls. We left after that. I couldn't take another hymn. You ask where the king went. Thales' smile fades. To the lake. The boar nods. That's where the next chapter starts. Thales hands you a small scroll. My account. Some of it's embellished. One section includes a romantic subplot between a tree and a gust of wind. You'll know when you get there. You thank him. He bows. Tell the tale well, or at least make it rhyme. The boar snorts, turns, and begins walking again. As you follow, you hear one last verse drifting after you on the wind. Follow the tusk, follow the tail, through leafy truth and questions pale. For wisdom walks on muddy feet, and answers sleep where riddles meet. You don't know if it's helpful, but it's stuck in your head now. Like all good myths, the lake appears like a silver coin tossed onto the land by a careless god. It's still wide and strangely flat, too flat, like it's pretending to be calm in the hope that you'll stop asking it questions. You stand at the shore, staring into its glassy surface. The boar stops beside you, sniffing the air like someone trying to remember whether they left the stove on. This is where the king tried to solve me, he says. You glance at him. Not talk to me, the boar clarifies. Solve me, like a riddle or a badly translated recipe. You step closer to the water. The reflection is perfect, almost too perfect. You see yourself, the boar, the trees behind you, but no sky. Just a kind of void where the heavens should be, like the lake doesn't believe in stars. The boar gestures to a cluster of stones arranged in a half circle nearby. That's where he sat, he says, every morning, every evening, watching the lake, asking it questions, asking me questions, hoping the answers would ripple out of the water like enlightenment with good posture. You sit on one of the stones. It's cool, smoothed by time, probably haunted by metaphors. The king had come here in his final phase after the oracle, after the bard, after the village had stopped sending him politely worded requests to please stop philosophizing in the turnip fields. He believed, the boar says slowly, that if he could reflect perfectly like the lake, then all the questions would settle. So he sat and asked. You ask what kind of questions? Ones that started well, the boar replies. What is the nature of wisdom? Where does silence come from? But eventually they became weirder. You wait. He once asked the lake, do fish ever feel embarrassed? You blink. The lake didn't answer, the boar adds, but a frog leapt out and hit him in the face. We took it as a no. Day after day, the king journaled beside the water. He called his notebook Dialogues with Reflection. It began as a philosophical treatise. It ended as a conversation with himself. He wrote in both voices. The boar mutters, his own and the lake's. You raise an eyebrow. Oh yes, he says. And the lake's side was very passive-aggressive. You ask if the king ever had a breakthrough. In a sense, the boar says he started to believe he was the lake. You pause. He said he had reached stillness, the boar explains. That he understood everything because he was reflecting everything. That he had become the medium of universal truths. You stare at the motionless water. It stares back. He then walked into the lake, the boar continues, and asked to be renamed. To what? King insightful, the transparent. You wait for the punchline. There wasn't one, the boar sighs. He caught a cold, came out shivering and declared it a cleansing rite. A dragonfly skims the surface of the lake too fast to catch in words. The wind stirs the reeds. Somewhere in the distance a bird calls and immediately regrets it. He built a small dock, the boar says, pointing with his tusk. Waited out every day. Hoped the answers would arrive like a fairy. They never did. Historians still debate whether this period of the king's life was one of spiritual awakening or slow, stylish unraveling. A few even argue he reached something close to true understanding, but in a language no one else could translate. He stopped talking to people, the boar says, started humming instead. Claimed it was the lake's melody. You glance at him. Honestly, the boar admits it was kind of catchy. You hum experimentally. The lake doesn't respond. You ask what happened when winter came. The boar smiles grimly. He refused to leave. Said the frozen surface was clarity incarnate. He slipped a lot. Eventually, the king began carving his questions into the ice. Daily, dozens, by hand. He called it ice journaling, the boar says. It lasted 3 weeks until the first thaw washed it all away. He wept, declared it divine erasure, said the lake was curating his thoughts. You ask if he ever stopped. One day, the boar replies he brought a mirror. Of course he did. He set it on the dock, faced it toward the water, spoke to it for hours, called it a closed loop of knowing, and then he left. The boar says, just stood up, took his cloak, and walked back toward the forest. Why? Because the mirror cracked, the boar says softly, and he said, even reflections must break eventually. You both sit in silence. The lake ripples once, just once, enough to remind you it's listening, or maybe just breathing. You ask if the king ever returned. Once the boar nods, with no questions, just bread. He fed the ducks, sat, smiled, then walked away. You stare at the lake for a long moment. It doesn't offer wisdom, just quiet. Eventually, the boar stands. Come, he says. We've got to visit the librarian. He knows what the king left behind. You rise and follow. As you walk, you glance back, and in your reflection on the lake's surface, you swear just for a second you see a crown made of reeds and regret. Then it's gone. You follow the boar along a winding trail marked only by memory and occasional sarcastic claw marks on tree trunks. The forest feels older here, not in the gnarled branch spooky movie way, but in the deep library smell dust on scrolls sort of way. Even the birds seem quieter, as if they're being charged overdue fees for chirping too loudly. This, the boar says, pushing aside a curtain of ivy, is where he kept the stories. You step into a hollowed-out hill, almost invisible from the outside, now revealed as a cavernous chamber of stacked scrolls, carved niches and polished stones arranged like reading stools. It's not damp or cold, just quiet, profoundly so, like time is paused waiting for you to speak in lowercase. At the far end of the chamber, a figure emerges, robes the color of bruised parchment spectacles, balanced on a beak-like nose and an expression that could curdle milk from 3 paces away. Ah, he says, you've brought a visitor again. The boar rolls his eyes. This is archivist Elian. He manages all the myths no one finishes properly. Elian sniffs, and most of the ones people finish incorrectly. You say hello. He narrows his eyes. We don't say hello here. We say, state your narrative axis and thematic burden. You pause, curiosity, and mild foot pain. Elian snorts. Acceptable. He disappears into one of the deeper alcoves. Scrolls rustle, stones shift, and something large hisses but is quickly shushed. After a moment he returns, holding a small bundle tied in waxy twine. The king's record, he says. Such as it is, you take the bundle. It's heavier than it looks. 36 entries, Elian explains, written after the lake, full of half-answers and full-volume emotions. You begin to untie it, but the boar places a hoof on your hand. Wait, he says. Let me tell you how it got here. After the king left the lake, he wandered. Not aimlessly, but not with purpose either. It was a kind of meandering with dignity. He visited places that had ignored him and didn't speak. He returned to the village, left a basket of bread and a handwritten apology pinned to the goat pen. He stopped by the oracle's ruined cousin's tea cart, nodded, and walked on. He was quieter, the boar says, and that frightened people more than when he was asking questions. He wrote, though, at night, by firelight, on scraps, on leaves, on bark, eventually on proper parchment. He didn't label them, just dated them. Short entries, longer ones, some written in spirals, some with entire lines crossed out and rewritten in goat-related metaphors. He brought them here himself, Elian cuts in, knocked 3 times, handed me the bundle and said, "File this under lessons I learned too late." You ask if anyone ever read them. Elian raises one eyebrow. We're not in the business of interpretation here. But you've read them, the boar says, nudging the archivist. Elian frowns, yet turns skimmed. You open the first scroll. Today I listened to the wind and it said nothing. That may have been the answer. You open another, tried to debate a goat, lost, fairly, and another. The lake reflected me until I saw someone else. I hope he's better at taxes. You smile. They're strange, yes, but honest. The kind of writing that isn't trying to impress, just record. He stopped trying to define wisdom, the boar says. Started trying to witness it instead. You reach the last scroll. It's different, inked in green, no date. I never solved the boar, or the forest, or the silence, but I think they forgave me. You sit in silence. Even Elian doesn't scoff. He left after that, the boar says. Walked into the eastern grove. Hasn't been seen since. Some say he became a tree. Elian sniffs. Some say he got a job at a distant bakery and refuses to serve anyone who uses rhetorical questions. You place the scrolls back into the bundle and set them gently on a stone shelf. They feel like they belong here. The boar nudges your elbow. There's one more thing. You follow him deeper into the archive, past crumbling myths, discarded legends, and a small locked box labeled "Do Not Open," too confusing even for us. At the very back is a circle of stones. In the center, a chair, wooden, smooth, worn. You approach. He built that, the boar says, called it the listening seat. You sit. It doesn't offer answers or questions. It just feels like pause, a moment of story without urgency. The boar sits across from you. Elian mutters something about needing to alphabetize the stories again and disappears behind a curtain of papyrus. You ask the boar what comes next. He shrugs. We keep walking, I suppose. There's a goddess up north who tried to help. You should meet her. You nod. And together you rise. The archive hums quietly behind you. The scrolls breathe in their sleep. And somewhere far away, a king dreams, without needing to be wise. The path north winds uphill through a grove of olive trees that whisper in a dialect older than Greek. Their gnarled trunks lean together like old women, swapping secrets, and their leaves shimmer with that silvery green glow that always seems slightly suspicious. You can feel the air shift, not colder but clearer, like it's been filtered through memory. The boar walks ahead of you a little slower than usual, as if this part of the journey isn't one he takes lightly. He hasn't spoken much since the archive, but now he glances back and mutters, "She meant well." That was the problem. You ask who she is. "A goddess," he says. "Minor, technically, but don't say that to her face." The trees part, revealing a clearing stitched together from sunlight and soft moss. In the center is a stone bench, a fountain that no longer flows, and a woman sitting cross-legged on a blanket of woven light. She looks up as you approach. Her hair is the color of dry wheat, her skin sun-browned and freckled, like a map of all the places no one visits anymore. Her robes are teal and rust and shaped like they were designed by a committee of butterflies. Well, she says it only took you 10 sections to get here. You blink. She grins. "I see the boar still doesn't warn people." The boar grumbles. "Would it have helped you sit on a worn stone across from her?" "This," the boar says, "is Lysistra, goddess of almosts." You hesitate. "Almosts?" She nods. "I preside over things that nearly happened, plans that nearly worked, wisdom almost attained." You glance at the fountain. It bubbles once, just to prove it still could. Lysistra smiles. "I met the king during his reflective period. He was charming, frustrated, very into symbolic footwear. You try to imagine the king in sandals carved with quotes. He prayed," she continues. "To me, most mortals don't. They prefer the big names. Zeus for thunder, Athena for brainy drama, Hades if they're feeling edgy. But Melanthios prayed to me, asked me to show him what he almost understood." You ask if she did. "I tried," she says. "That's my whole deal. I can't show what is, only what nearly was." She pulls something from the air, a shimmer barely visible, like smoke pretending to be lace, and tosses it toward you. It lands gently in your lap. It's not tangible, not solid, but you can see it. A version of the king sitting quietly in the village, helping repair a fence. Laughing, listening. No scrolls, no riddles, just present. You reach out to touch it, and your hand passes through. "I showed him dozens of these," she says. "What he might have been, what he almost grasped, what nearly made sense." You ask how he reacted. She shrugs. "Poorly. He thought I was mocking him." The boar snorts. He accused her of weaponized ambiguity. Lysistra smiles faintly. "I offered him peace. He chose the chase instead." She stands brushing moss from her robes, but I'll give him credit. "He asked me one question that I'd never heard before." You lean forward. He asked, "What would I be if I stopped trying to be anything?" You sit with that. The question folds into itself like a poem that rhymes by accident. "And what did you tell him?" you ask. She tilts her head. "Nothing. Because I don't rule over what is, only what might have been. But sometimes silence is the closest thing to a gift." You feel the scroll in your pack pulse faintly. The blankness now feels less like an absence and more like space. Lysistra steps away from the fountain and plucks an olive from the nearest tree. She hands it to the boar. "This is for the oracle," she says. She's still mad about the olives you owed her. The boar grumbles but takes it. Before you leave, you ask Lysistra one more question. "Do people ever come here twice?" She thinks for a moment. "Rarely," she says. "Most people can only carry one almost at a time." You nod. Then you follow the boar out of the grove, back through the whispering trees, and into the path shaped by fading sunlight. As you walk, you ask the boar if he thinks the king ever figured it out. What the secret of wisdom, he replies. Maybe. Or maybe he just got tired of asking. You consider this. The wind brushes your cheek like a page being turned. You think of the scroll, the lake, the quiet chair in the archive. You think of the king asking nothing at all. And maybe, just maybe, that was the answer. You and the boar walk in silence for a while, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full of echoes. The path is gentler now, lined with low brush and quiet stones, each one shaped like it once had something to say, but forgot just before the punchline. The sky above softens into that hazy, almost gold shade that could mean either late afternoon or early regret. Finally, the boar clears his throat. So, you've heard from the oracle, the bard, the goddess, the librarian, and me. You nod. Then it's time, he says, for bureaucracy. You stop walking. He nods grimly. Yes, the paperwork part of the myth. The trail widens strangely even underfoot until it turns into a flagstone courtyard where logic goes to retire. At its center is a squat building made of sandstone and indecision. Pillars lean slightly, windows blink open and shut without warning. A weather vane on the roof spins lazily between maybe and try again later. This, the boar explains, is the Bureau of Mythic Classification and Accountability, a place no one likes to acknowledge exists, but which absolutely does, mostly to ensure gods don't overpromise and mortals don't underdocument. As you approach the door, it opens on its own with the creak of reluctant legal compliance. Inside, shelves upon shelves of scrolls-bound tomes and glowing ledgers float gently in midair like polite ghosts with clipboards. A woman sits at the front desk, hair in a tight bun, spectacles hanging from a bronze chain. She doesn't look up as you enter. She's too busy stamping a scroll that immediately bursts into butterflies and vanishes with a poof. Nameplate Cleo Administrative Muse of Documented Folly. The boar bows slightly. Hello, Cleo, she sighs. Still talking, I see. He turns to you. She's in charge of indexing myths that get out of hand. You glance around. The walls are covered with annotated timelines. One in particular reads, The Curious Case of the Talking Boar and the Foolish King. Status ongoing. Addendum count 47. Cleo finally looks up. Her eyes are sharp in a bored way, like someone who has been unimpressed since the Bronze Age. You brought someone new, she says. Not another bard, I hope. No, the boar replies. This one listens. She narrows her eyes. We'll see. You step forward and place the scroll on her desk. Her fingers hover above it for a moment, then lower like rain on a drum. Oracle issued. No ink, blank field, classic ambiguity clause. She flips the scroll with one finger. Intended for Melanthios. Unclaimed. She looks up. Are you here to close the case? You blink. Close it. She gestures around. Every myth must end. Eventually, or at least resolve. We don't like loose ends. They tangle up the timelines, cause poets to spiral. You glance at the boar. He nods slowly. We're getting close. Cleo gestures and a panel in the floor opens with a grumble. A platform rises holding a thick tome titled The Royal Queries of Melanthios the Perplexed, Revised Edition. It thumps onto her desk like a guilty conscience. She flips to the final pages. Blank. There's room for one more entry, she says. You realize what she means. You're supposed to write it, but I didn't know him, you say. She shrugs. Doesn't matter. You've followed the trail. You've listened. That's more than most. The boar steps beside you. Write what you think he found, or what he nearly did. Your hand shakes slightly as you take the offered quill. You stare at the page, and then slowly you write. He asked until the questions quieted. He searched until the searching softened. He listened not for answers, but for stillness. And when he finally sat with nothing, he found something. Cleo watches you finish. Then, surprisingly, she nods. That'll do. The words glow softly, then fade into the page, as if exhaled. The platform sinks again. The tome disappears with a polite ding. The boar exhales long and low. Cleo adjusts her spectacles and returns to her paperwork. It's done, she says. He's filed under wisdom accidental, resolution soft closure. You smile. The boar turns toward the exit. Come on, we've got one more place to go. You step out of the bureau. The air outside feels different, lighter, like something in the world has unclenched. Behind you, Cleo stamps another scroll. It explodes into glitter. No one flinches. You walk in silence again, this time, not because the moment demands it, but because the silence feels earned. Like a pause after a long song, not an ending, just a breath. The boar leads you south now toward a grove that looks like it was carved out of the forest rather than grown from it. The trees are thinner, whiter, as if bleached by moonlight. Their branches twist not toward the sky, but toward each other, forming arches, a natural cathedral. This, the boar says softly, is where the king left it. You ask what it is, the question he says, the last one. The grove's floor is carpeted with petals, white lavender and silver that fall constantly, though no breeze moves. They don't crunch underfoot. They don't make a sound. Even the birds, if they exist here, are quiet. At the center of the grove stands a pedestal, moss-covered and oddly plain, holding nothing but a flat stone tablet. The boar gestures toward it. Go ahead, he says. You step forward and look down. There's no inscription, at least not in the usual sense. The surface of the stone doesn't hold words, but grooves, faint, looping, aimless, not etched with confidence, traced maybe, repeatedly. He came here at the end, the boar says, stepping closer, not to finish anything, just to be. You reach out and run your fingers over the shallow grooves. They're not in any language, you know, not runes or characters, just wandering marks, like someone trying to draw their thoughts and finding only silence in return. He sat, the boar continues. Every day, no scrolls, no speeches, no metaphors about cheese, just him and the stone. You ask if he spoke. The boar shakes his head. Not once. He didn't need to. The silence said it all. The wind stirs, not dramatically, just enough to remind you that it still exists. He wasn't foolish anymore, the boar says. He just stopped being loud. You ask how long he stayed. Until the forest let him go, the boar says. Some places hold on to people until they're quiet enough to leave. You trace another line in the stone. It leads nowhere. And that feels right. Historians still argue whether the king ever found what he was looking for. Some say he faded into myth. Some say he became the wind. A few insist he moved into a cottage with a hedgehog and refused to discuss philosophy ever again. But I know, the boar says. You turn to him. He found rest, the boar says. Not peace, not understanding, but rest. The kind where you stop being chased by your own mind. You sit beside the pedestal. The moss is warm. The petals fall gently onto your lap. The boar settles across from you, tail flicking slowly. He left the last question here, he says, and I think it's yours now. You ask what it is. He smiles. Whatever you want it to be. You look down at the stone again. The grooves are still just grooves. Or maybe they're paths. Or maybe they're just decoration from a mind that finally stopped needing meaning. You lean back, arms stretched, and for a long while, you say nothing, and the grove listens. Eventually, the boar rises. Come on, he says, voice softer than before. Let's walk until we're somewhere else. You stand and follow. The petals fall, the questions remain, but the need for answers that stays behind. You and the boar walk without hurry, weaving between trunks and shadows, following no road, but the one that seems to form under your feet. The forest around you is quiet in the way libraries wish they could be, thick with thought, softened by time. You notice now how the light seems gentler here, as if the sun itself is whispering instead of shining. I think the boar says finally that the king would have liked this part of the myth, the part where no one expects him to do anything. You nod. You're beginning to understand that myths don't always end in thunder or transformation. Sometimes they just ease out like a yawn. You reach a shallow hill topped by an old tree that leans like it's tired of standing straight. Beneath it sits a wooden sign, faded but legible. Welcome to the ambiguous monument of possibly something. You turn to the boar. He shrugs. We couldn't agree on what it meant, so we made it official. The monument itself is a stone slab half sunk into the earth, wrapped in vines and shaped like it started out with purpose and then gave up halfway through. On it, someone has carved dozens of short phrases. Maybe the answer is in the asking. Wisdom is remembering not to interrupt moss. Goats know, they just won't tell you. You don't need to understand to be still. You read them aloud one by one. Most of those, the boar says, were added by passers-by, travelers, listeners. Once word of the king spread, people started coming, not to find him, but to be here. You ask what they're looking for. Space, the boar replies. To think, to stop, to ask without needing an answer. You sit on the edge of the monument, feet in the grass. Insects buzz politely. The wind shifts directions like it's indecisive. A few small stones surround the slab, each marked with a name or a single word. One says almost. Another just says yes, they're left behind, the boar says, by those who want to mark the moment. Not claim it, just note that they were here. You ask if the king ever came here. Oh yes, the boar nods. More than once. He never added anything, but he sat, sometimes for hours, just tracing the words with his fingers, smiling. You wonder aloud if the myth ever reached beyond this forest. The boar shrugs. Depends on what you mean by reach. It's not famous. It's not recited in temples or written on amphoras, but it sticks. People remember fragments, a line, a feeling, that strange tale about the king who wouldn't stop asking. He paces slowly around the monument, pausing to nudge a wayward beetle off the stone. And he adds, I got to witness all of it, which is its own kind of blessing. You glance up. Do you think you were part of the lesson? He snorts. No, I was the intermission. You laugh. The boar grins. Though he says, I did offer him my hooves once. Told him I'd walk his questions to the horizon for him. You ask what he said. He said, they're lighter than they used to be. I'll carry them a bit longer. You sit with that. The sun begins to lower, slow and reluctant. The shadows lengthen into arms that stretch but never quite reach. You rise. The boar walks beside you, hooves soft in the grass. There's one last place, he says. Not dramatic, but important. You nod. Ahead, you see a cluster of lanterns swaying in the trees. A gentle flicker of orange like firelight with good posture. As you approach, you notice they hang from wooden poles, stuck into the ground in a circle. At the center is a small bench. On the bench, a basket of fruit, a folded cloak, and a cup of something steaming. The boar says nothing, you know. This is where the king said goodbye. He left the fruit for the forest, the boar says. The cloak for the cold. The cup for the next person who sits here. You ask what was in the cup. Always tea, the boar says. And once hot soup. That was an accident. Very confusing. You sit, you sip. It's warms, familiar. Slightly herbal with an aftertaste of humility. The lanterns flicker. You ask the boar what he'll do next. He shrugs. Tell the story. Again, differently. To someone else. Maybe I'll skip the lake next time, or make the king a woman, or the boar a librarian. You smile. Would that change anything? He grins. Not a thing. You both sit quietly in the glow of fading light and fire. The king may be gone, but the myth, as it always does, continues. The lanterns sway gently in the trees above you, casting soft light that dances across the clearing. It feels like the closing moments of a story, but not in the theatrical curtain drop sort of way. More like the final few breaths after a good conversation, the kind that doesn't need applause, only acknowledgement. The boar stands slowly, joints creaking like an old door you forgot was locked. "Come on," he says, "there's just one more thing." You follow him through a thin grove of silver-barked trees that shimmer faintly like they remember moonlight even in the day. The path here is barely there, just the faint press of hooves and questions that walked ahead of you. Eventually you arrive at a low stone wall shaped in a perfect circle. Inside it, nothing. Just grass, soft and green. No statues, no inscriptions, no offerings. Just space. The boar walks to the edge, then sits. This, he says, is where the king stopped walking. You join him on the stone. He didn't die here, the boar adds quickly. At least not in any way myths like to record. He just stopped needing to move. You look into the empty space. It's oddly comforting. A place with no pressure to be wise or meaningful or dramatic, just still. He spent his last days sitting here, the boar continues. Sometimes humming, sometimes whistling, sometimes saying absolutely nothing. You glance at him. He'd watch the clouds, the boar says, or the trees shifting, or birds landing and leaving. He once watched a single ant for 47 minutes. I timed him. You smile. You know what he said to me the last time we spoke, the boar asks. You shake your head. He said, "You were never the answer, but you were never the problem either." The boar chuckles. I still don't know if that was profound or just a polite way of saying goodbye. The grass stirs slightly. Nothing else moves. You ask if anyone else knows about this place. A few, he says. The bard visited once, left a lyre behind, claimed it was symbolic. It fell apart in the rain. You nod. I tell people about it sometimes, he adds, but most prefer the lake or the monument. This place doesn't offer anything. No riddles, no lines to memorize, no great tragedy. You lean back on your elbows and look up at the sky. You realize there's no story left to tell. Not here, just space, and yet it feels complete. Maybe that's the point. Historians still argue whether King Melanthios died forgotten or remembered, whether his silence was defeat or enlightenment, whether his endless questions meant he was wise, or that he simply never learned to sit still. The boar looks at you. What do you think you answer without speaking? He nods. That's enough, he says. You both sit there as the sun dips lower. The sky blurs into shades of lavender and brass. The forest hushes its breath. Eventually, you rise. The boar doesn't. I'll stay, he says. This is my part of the myth. You ask if he'll ever leave. Maybe he says, when the story doesn't need me anymore. You smile. It's the only answer that fits. You walk back through the trees, past the lanterns, past the bench, past the monument with the not-quite inscriptions. Everything feels like it's winding down, like a dream getting ready to let go. At the edge of the forest, you turn. The boar is still sitting, not waiting, not watching, just being. You step into the last light of the day, and it wraps around you like a blanket made of story and sleep. The forest fades behind you. The questions for now are quiet, and the myth softly, gently closes its eyes. You don't return the way you came. The forest won't allow it, not out of cruelty, but because myths prefer forward motion, even when looping quietly back to the beginning. The trees shift around you subtly. Paths disappear behind your steps. The air grows cooler, then warmer, then still again. Somewhere in the distance, something hoots softly, either an owl or a philosopher with indigestion. You walk without thinking. Not because you're lost, but because for the first time you don't mind where you're going. Then the path opens again, revealing a hill you don't remember climbing. At the top sits a chair, just a chair. Simple, wooden, plain, facing nothing in particular and everything all at once. You walk toward it unsure if you've earned the right to sit in it or if the myth is offering you one last joke. The wind nudges at your cloak, like it's encouraging you to make up your mind already. You sit. Nothing happens, which is the point. No thunder, no prophecy, no sudden insight that turns your thoughts inside out. Just the ache in your legs and the softness of the evening, and the sound of your own breath. You lean back, and for a moment you think you can hear it, the soft shuffle of the king's footsteps long ago pacing this same patch of earth. The muttering, the writing, the sighing, the laughing even maybe, on a good day. You imagine him sitting here too, crown slightly askew, wondering whether answers ever arrive by invitation, or whether they simply sneak in while you're busy looking somewhere else. You glance to your left. A goat is staring at you. It's chewing slowly, thoughtfully, as though deciding whether you deserve its attention. You nod at it. It blinks and walks away. You smile. That's probably as close to divine acknowledgement as anyone gets. The boar isn't here, but you don't need him now. You carry him in your steps, in your memory, in that dry little grunt that occasionally bubbles up when you say something too clever by half. The light shifts again, amber into dusk, into lavender, into indigo. The sky is full of stars, but they haven't turned them on yet. You think about everything, the lake, the monument, the goddess of almosts, the oracle with the hangover, the bard with his endless rhymes, the librarian who never smiled, the scroll that said nothing but held everything. And you think maybe the myth wasn't about the king? Maybe it was always about the walking and the listening and the sitting and the goats, especially the goats. You rise slowly. The chair stays behind like an old friend who doesn't need to follow you to understand where you're going. Down the hill, the forest waits not as a test this time, but as a presence, a kind of hush, a kind of welcome. You walk into it, and the shadows fold around you with the soft grace of a story that has nothing left to prove. The forest feels different now, not darker, just deeper, like it's finally comfortable enough with your presence to show you its real shape. The trees grow taller here, but not in the imposing way. They lean in, yes, but gently, as if curious, as if wondering what kind of traveler you've become. You walk with quiet steps, not careful ones, just present ones, the kind that touch the earth without demanding anything in return. The path leads you through a patch of wild mint. It crushes underfoot, releasing a smell that is equal parts summer memory and unexpected clarity. Ahead, you see a flickering light. You pause. The boar know? You know it's not him. He's finished his part in this. You approach the glow and find not a campfire, not a torch, but a small ring of candles floating inches above the ground. They're unguarded, unbothered by wind. Each one burns with a steady golden flame that doesn't flicker, doesn't smoke, doesn't even pretend to follow the rules of physics. In the center of the ring is a stone bowl filled with water, perfectly still. This is not part of the king's story. This is yours. You sit beside it. The bowl reflects your face, but not like a normal reflection, not just upside down and wet-looking. This one shifts slightly as you watch, like it's remembering you differently. Not better, not worse, just clearer. And then it changes. You see the oracle stirring her tea with a stick that probably has a name. You see the bard tangled in his own metaphor, smiling as if heartbreak was just another rhyme scheme. You see the librarian stamping something that didn't ask to be understood. The goddess of almosts offering not a blessing but a question. And the king, always the king, walking slowly into the forest, head tilted back, watching the clouds, no longer trying to explain them. They fade. The bowl reflects you again. And then, just briefly, it shows someone else, someone familiar, tired, curious, sitting in the same spot where you now sit, Melanthius. He doesn't look wise, or noble, or terribly foolish, just like someone who finally stopped chasing meaning long enough to enjoy the mystery. Then he smiles, and the image vanishes. You sit with that for a long time. Eventually, you rise. The candles flicker, not as a farewell, but as a nod. The forest parts again, revealing a trail you hadn't noticed before. It's narrower, quieter, meant for one person. You follow it. Your footsteps don't echo anymore. Not because the sound is gone, but because the forest no longer needs to repeat you. The stars begin to appear, one by one, not all at once, not loudly, just enough to remind you that stories don't end, they fade. They soften. They stretch into other stories, sometimes unnamed. And somewhere behind you, a scroll remains unwritten, because now you understand. Some scrolls are meant to be blank, not to withhold, but to hold space. For listening, you're not sure when the trees ended and the sky began. It happens gradually, like most endings that aren't really endings. One moment you're brushing past leaves that smell like cedar and shadow, and the next you're standing in an open field, the grass rippling in the breeze like a book no one's finished reading. There's a stillness here, not absence, presence, as if the land itself has taken a deep breath and decided not to exhale until you've said what you came to say. You don't speak, you just stand, because now you understand that some parts of a myth aren't meant to be narrated. They're meant to be stood inside. In the center of the field is a single perfectly ordinary rock. You walk to it, sit. It's smooth and flat and warm from a sun that set an hour ago, but left behind a little extra light just in case. You stare out at the horizon. There's no town in sight, no smoke, no sound, just the hum of everything being quietly okay for once. And then you notice it, on the rock carved in small, almost embarrassed lettering. If you're still looking for the answer, you've already walked past it. You smile. Because of course the king came here. Of course he left that message. You lie back, hands behind your head, watching the sky slowly darken above you. Stars blink into view like a memory returning in pieces. You begin to trace their patterns, not to name them, but to follow their lines. Somewhere in the distance, a soft bleat, a goat. You laugh gently. Some parts of the myth really do stay with you. And now, because the myth demands it, or maybe because you want to, you speak aloud. Thank you. It's not addressed to anyone in particular, but you're sure it reaches all the right places. Behind you, the forest glows faintly. Ahead of you, the stars don't answer, but they keep shining anyway. You stay like that for a long time. You may sleep, you may dream, you may rise and walk again. The myth doesn't need to know which. It's done what it came to do, and so have you. When you wake, if you ever slept, the world has turned a softer shade of quiet. The grass beneath you is cool with dew. The stars above have thinned into morning haze. Somewhere nearby, a bird rehearses a song it isn't quite ready to perform. You stretch. The rock creaks beneath you like an old companion adjusting its weight. The path that brought you here is gone. Another one appears. You're not surprised. You follow it not because you're seeking something, but because walking feels right again, like punctuation after a long sentence. The trail leads through a grove of low trees, their branches curved like cradles. Hanging from some of them are wind chimes made of old spoons, snail shells, bits of glass that catch the rising sun. They don't clang, they whisper. The wind moves through them like a storyteller, too tired for full sentences. Then you see it. At the center of the grove, surrounded by flat stones and wild thyme, stands a statue. You weren't expecting a statue. It's not regal. It's not tall. It's not even on a pedestal. It's just a simple likeness of a man sitting cross-legged holding nothing in his hands. You know who it is. Melanthios, but not the king as you first imagined him. Robes, scrolls, frown lines carved from overthinking. This is him as he must have been in the end, barefoot, serene mouth, slightly open like he was caught mid-laugh or mid-thought or mid-nothing at all. At the statue's base is a plaque. You crouch to read it. He questioned everything until he didn't have to. You sit across from the statue. Someone has left a loaf of bread on the grass nearby. It's half-eaten, but the gesture remains intact. You ask aloud, did anyone ever know him? Really know him? The wind rustles. The statue does not answer, but you think yes. The boar knew him. The bard thought he did. The villagers knew his questions, if not the man. The forest knew his footprints. And now, you know a version of him too. That's all any myth can hope for, to be known in pieces by those willing to carry the story. A movement catches your eye. A young goat, small, scruffy, curious, ambles into the grove. It sniffs at the bread, looks at you, and blinks. You blink back. Then it climbs onto the statue's lap and curls up like it owns the place. You chuckle. Seems about right. You stay a little longer. You don't need to ask anything. The statue stays still. The goat sleeps. The wind chimes, whisper nothing in particular. And the myth does what myths do best. It keeps breathing without you. Eventually you rise quietly so as not to wake the goat. It twitches once, then resumes the universal language of peaceful dreaming. You take one last look at the statue. It hasn't changed, but you have. You no longer expect it to speak. You no longer wish for it to. The path from the grove is new again. Softer now. It curves gently through fields freckled with early flowers and strange little shrubs shaped like questions that never quite bloomed. As you walk, you begin to notice signs, not road signs, but remnants. A carved stick left leaning against a tree. A set of boot prints heading in no particular direction. A stone shaped like a question mark resting at the base of a sleeping willow. A scrap of paper caught in a bush scribbled with, what if the answer was a nap all along? The boar's influence, perhaps. Or the king's, or yours. Up ahead, the trail splits. One path leads into a shadowed grove where low music hums bard-like and suspiciously off-key. Another climbs a rocky hill where distant voices argue in the cadence of debating philosophers, possibly over olives. A third curves downward into a valley filled with small yurts, goats, and someone selling tea that smells like rosemary and unresolved issues. You stand at the crossroads. There is no signpost, no map, no wise old woman with riddles or tired gods disguised as beggars. Just options, possibilities, almosts. You choose none of them yet. Instead, you sit on a nearby stump. Let the forest catch up with you. Let your own story breathe a little. You pull out the blank scroll again. It's different now. Still blank, yes, but not empty. It feels like it's holding room for things that don't need to be said. For ideas still stretching. For wisdom that doesn't perform. For silence that isn't lonely. You trace your finger across the surface. It warms slightly, not magically, just enough to remind you that even blank pages have weight. From somewhere behind you, a twig snaps. You turn. It's a goat. Of course it is. It stares at you, then turns around and trots up the hill, glancing back once as if to say, well, are you coming or not? You chuckle. You stand. You tuck the scroll away. And you follow. Because at this point in the myth, that's what you do. You don't chase answers anymore. You walk with them. You keep them company. You let them grow legs and wander ahead of you into the unknown. And you trust that when they stop, you'll know it's time to sit again. The goat leads you up the hill at an unnecessarily brisk pace, stopping occasionally to chew something invisible or judge your cardio. You follow not because it makes sense, but because at this point in the myth, refusing to follow a goat would be narratively dishonest. The slope is steep but manageable, the kind of climb that leaves you breathless but not defeated. At the top, you find an outcrop of stone that looks over everything you've passed: the lake, the grove, the monument, the forest, even a tiny speck that might be the oracle's teapot, still steaming in defiance of the laws of heat and time. You sit. The goat lays down beside you, tucks its legs under, and sighs as if it too has had enough metaphor for one lifetime. The boar is not here, nor is the king, but you feel them like impressions in the moss, echoes in the air, the spaces in stories where their names still live. You pull out the scroll once more, still blank, and this time you're glad it is. You no longer want to fill it. You simply want to carry it, to hold the space, to leave the answers unwritten. Because maybe the myth was never about finishing something. Maybe it was about staying with the unfinishable. From this height, the paths twist and vanish into the horizon. You can't see where they lead. You don't need to. You look up. The sky is open and quiet and full of patient stars waiting their turn. You whisper one final question, not to the goat or the sky or even yourself. You whisper it to the story. Will you keep going? There's no voice that answers, but the breeze shifts, the goat stands, and the scroll glows faintly at the edges like a page, quietly beginning again. The wind carries you gently down the other side of the hill. No fanfare, no rising music. Just gravity doing what gravity always does, persisting with quiet confidence. The goat has disappeared as goats do in myths, when their work is done, leaving behind only a hoof print, shaped suspiciously like an ellipsis. You follow a path now etched more in rhythm than in dirt. Your steps measured the earth beneath them, soft with acceptance. You no longer need signs or symbols, or softly glowing stones whispering your name. You have something better, stillness. The forest reappears slowly around you, but it's changed. Or you have. Probably both. What once felt like a maze now feels like a hallway. What once murmured secrets now simply breathes. You arrive at a clearing you don't remember entering, and yet you recognize it instantly. In the center is a circle of low stones. No pedestal, no statue, no scrolls. Just a fire pit, warm with ember glow, and the smell of something faintly sweet, figs maybe, or kindness. And around the fire people, not gods, not prophets, not metaphors dressed in robes, just people. Some are sitting, some are lying on blankets, one is sketching, another is half asleep with their head on someone's lap. No one speaks loudly, no one needs to. You step into the circle, a space opens for you. You sit, and you realize this is where stories come to rest, not to die. To rest, to soak into other stories, to soften at the edges, to whisper into ears that didn't know they were listening. Someone passes you a mug, warm, spiced, a recipe shared by a neighbor who probably stole it from a goddess with terrible handwriting. You sip and feel a kind of yes bloom in your chest. Someone nearby is laughing not at a joke, but at a memory that doesn't hurt anymore. Another person begins to hum. The fire crackles. The stars above blink. The forest settles a little deeper into itself. And your story, the one you followed here, the one you thought was about a foolish king and a talking boar, lays down beside you and exhales, not with closure, with comfort, not the end, but the quiet edge of it. You set the scroll on the grass beside you. It doesn't open. It doesn't need to. It's part of the circle now, part of the warmth, part of the myth that has stopped walking, just for a while. And maybe like the king, like the goat, like the question that never got answered because it didn't have to. You have arrived, not to understand, but to be. And so you and the boar keep walking, not quickly, not with urgency, but with the slow, quiet rhythm of two beings who have nowhere left to be except here and now. The forest around you grows softer somehow, less a place and more a feeling, a hush of green and golden light that seems to lean in close like a lullaby. The path narrows and then widens again, and you realize that even the trail is beginning to forget where it was going, content instead to simply exist beneath your feet. The boar doesn't speak. He doesn't need to, neither do you. Overhead, the sky is beginning to blur, colors blending into one another like watercolor dreams. No sharp edges, no loud thoughts, just dusk folding gently into something deeper, something quieter. The trees have stopped whispering, as if they too have decided to listen. You pause once beneath an arch of branches just long enough to feel the way the air settles on your skin, not cold, not warm, but kind. It smells faintly of moss and memory and a story that has told itself long enough to finally be still. And then the boar looks back not with expectation but with understanding. He nods once. A small thing, a true thing. You follow him into the hush where questions no longer chase you and answers no longer matter. And just before the forest closes behind you, you think maybe, just maybe, this is what peace sounds like. Soft, unfinished, content to wait until morning. Good night, sleep well. The myth will still be here when you wake.